welcome back to Wednesday Wonders. It's Ranger Erin, and our wonder today is we're wondering about earthworms. So earthworms, or really any type of worm, are these squiggly creatures that don't have any backbone, but they also don't have a hard outer shell like an insect or a spider. So they just are these soft-bodied creatures without any arms or legs. They don't have eyes, although they can tell when they're in light and dark situations. And we have them everywhere in the world. So most of our earthworms, they're only going to be a couple of inches long, squirmy little things. But the largest earthworm that's in the world can be 22 feet long, and that's the African earthworm. So these little guys, totally harmless to us, but really important to our ecosystem. So how do they live? Harmless as they are, how do they live out here? Earthworms are decomposers. That means they're going to eat dead stuff. So they're not really interested in any of our living plants, and they're not going to be interested in really fresh fruit, but they're going to go crazy for some rotten leaves and bits of sticks that have broken off and rotten fruit and even poop. They're going to break it all down and turn that back into soil. So they're living underground, but they do come up to the surface. And we don't normally see that happen too often because they're nocturnal. That means that they're going to be active at night because they're wet. They're a wet-bodied creature, and they're going to dry out if they're out here during the hot day. So they're only going to come up at night, and that's where we get the saying, the early bird gets the worm, because that early bird is out there while the sun hasn't even come up yet, and they get all of those worms that are still out there coming up. The other time that you might notice that they come up to the surface is after a really rainy day, because they breathe air just like us. And sometimes that soil gets a little too waterlogged, so their tunnels get full of water and they can't breathe, so they'll come up to the surface. And it's also just a really good time and an easy time for them to move around to a new spot. So they're often moving around looking for new food and stuff like that. So you'll see them on wet, rainy days. They're okay. If you see them on the sidewalk and they look like they're lost and they don't know how to get back to soil, you can kind of scoop them off and push them off to some dirt and help them out. We call that an earthworm rescue. So I said that those earthworms are really important to our ecosystems, and they are. So a lot of those earthworms, they're going to be a food source for other animals. We can name lots of animals that like to eat earthworms. We know that Ranger Russell, our turtle, he loves to go digging for some earthworms. Birds love them. They're always around and easy to find for lots of those animals. When there's nothing else to eat, there's always a worm to find. So they're a good food source for a lot of our animals, but they're also helping to feed our plants. So we know that those plants get their energy from the sun, but they need their nutrients from the soil. So those decomposers, our worms, are breaking down a lot of nutrients and good stuff, kind of like how we take vitamins. They take all of those nutrients that are wrapped up in leaves and stuff like that, and they turn it back into soil. That's what some of our decomposers do. And they're really long-lived. Did you know that your earthworms can be living for 6 to 9 years? They can live longer than a lot of the animals that eat on them. So some of our small rodents out here, they're only going to live for a few years, and they might be eating an earthworm that's going to be living longer than them. Our earthworms, you might have guessed, start out as eggs. So they'll get hatched out of what's called a cocoon, because there can be many eggs wrapped inside that cocoon, so as many as 12, sometimes it's just one, and it's a little lemon-shaped egg cocoon that's holding all of those eggs where they're going to hatch from. After they're hatched, they're called a hatchling, and what they look like are really, really tiny, almost white, so they don't even have any color, long worms. So they look exactly like the adults, but really tiny and almost white. They're going to eat, they're going to grow, and in a few months they're going to be an adult, and they're going to be like the earthworm that you know and you've seen all over the place. And then after that, that's when they're going to lay more of those cocoons, more earthworms. There's always so many earthworms. Here I've found that little lemon-shaped cocoon that's going to hatch, and maybe one or more earthworms are going to hatch out of that. When you're going out on your worm hike, what you're going to look for is worm poop. So not really big, actually has a special word that's called worm castings, and it's the only type of poop this ranger will tell you that it's okay to touch. That's because after that worm has eaten all of that stuff and then pooped it out into that worm casting, that's really just dirt. And you can see it was kind of hiding that little wormhole where that worm came up from last night and went back underground. So for our first activity, we're going to do what we call a worm count. So in 1 square foot of dirt, you might have up to 500 worms. And that's what we're going to check out right here. So we're going to do a little worm count. We're going to see how many worms are in 1 square foot. So you're going to choose your area. Make sure it's an area that's not going to be a problem for you to dig around in. You're going to need a ruler and then something to mark it off. So I've got flags, but you can also use whatever you like, sticks or anything like that. And then, of course, something to dig with. And if you like, gloves are pretty nice too. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to mark off an area. So I'm going to start here, place my flag. And then from that, making a square. Make sure I measure it on both sides. And just to check over here, definitely I've got my square. And I'm just gonna start to dig in between those flags and I'm gonna count. I'm gonna keep track of how many worms that I come across. Can make a guess beforehand. Pull apart some of those clumps of dirt because they like to hide in there. I found my first one. I'm going to be careful not to hurt it. Ooh, it was actually 2, maybe even 3. And I'll set those aside for later. After you've set aside those worms, we're gonna have a worm race. So you're gonna make a circle in the ground, and in the very center, you're gonna place those worms, and you can name them and figure out who's gonna make it out of there first. Right now, this really long one right over here, this one's the one that's in the lead. The rest of them are still kind of staying in their pile. And we'll start to see, wow, how do they move? Who's gonna make it out of that circle first? This one's getting pretty close to the edge. The edge is right over here. Got another one over here that started to move towards the edge and is now moving back towards the center. You can see how they stretch out their long body. And they're using the hairs that are along the sides of their body, microscopic hairs, so you can't see them, probably can't even feel them with your hands, but they have hairs all over their body that help them to move along. As always, I'd love to know who won your race. Was it the longest one? Was it the skinniest one? The one you didn't expect? Let me know how many worms you found in that 1 square foot. I found 23, which isn't super a lot, but that's a pretty good amount for that tiny little space. You let me know how many you found. And as always, I'll catch you all next time.